Pedro and Sofia believed that love could overcome any obstacle, that their feelings were strong enough to surpass any difficulty. But what do you do when the true enemy is not something visible, but rather the past, full of betrayals and secrets that keep resurfacing? They were willing to start over, away from everything that hurt them, in a place where they could just be the two of them. However, what seemed like a new life would soon turn into a nightmare when the past threatened everything they were trying to build. How do you move forward when the people you love most become the most dangerous? Would their love survive the weight of lies and the pain of the choices made? Pedro and Sofia, finally far from the shadows of their families and the conflicts that had marked their lives, believed that peace had arrived. The small town where they settled seemed like the perfect refuge, a place where they could start over, without pressure, without grudges. Sofia, for the first time in a long time, felt the lightness of being free from her father's grip, whose chains had kept her bound for so long. Yet, in her heart, there was still the weight of guilt for abandoning everything she had ever known. Pedro, on the other hand, felt the echo of his decision. His loyalty to his family conflicted with the love he had for Sofia, and he knew that his choices would have consequences far beyond his control. Despite the apparent calm, they both knew that no matter how hard they tried, the past never forgets. And the silence, though comforting, was merely the calm before the storm. Now, let's dive into this thrilling story, but first, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because in the upcoming videos, there will be even more emotional stories waiting for you. Pedro and Sofia's first weeks in the small town were, for them, a relief. The new cafe they had opened with so much care and hope would soon become the heart of the town. People were enchanted by how the simple, welcoming place made everyone feel at home. Sofia, with her sweet and attentive nature, won over the customers, while Pedro, with his energy and optimism, set the hard-working tone the place needed to grow. It seemed like they were finally finding their place in the world, leaving behind the shadows of past choices. However, what seemed like the beginning of a new life would soon reveal that the scars left by the past never fully heal. Sofia's father, an imposing man used to having everything under his control, could not accept the outcome of his daughter's story. He always believed that his decisions, even the harshest ones, were for the good of everyone, and this time would be no different. The fact that Sofia had walked away, going against his will, and joining Pedro, the son of the man he considered his greatest rival, was a humiliation he could not tolerate. In his eyes, Sofia's love for Pedro was an unforgivable betrayal. He knew the best way to deal with this was to destroy what they had before it made them even stronger. With his vast connections and influence, he began to move the pieces of the game. His strategy was clear. No direct attacks, just small sabotages that would make Pedro and Sofia feel like the world was against them. But he knew he had to be patient. The right moment would come. It all began with a peaceful night. Without any warning, when Pedro received a mysterious call. The number was unknown, and at first he hesitated. Who would be calling at such a late hour? The voice on the other end was deep and rushed. "Pedro, you don't know my name, but I worked with you at your old company. There's something you need to know. Your life is in danger. Sofia's too. Your father won't stop until he destroys you." Whatever it was, Pedro could feel the tension in the man's voice. "What do you mean? How is my life in danger?" he asked, trying to understand the gravity of the situation. But before he could hear more, the call was abruptly cut off. Pedro's mind raced. He tried to make sense of the stranger's words, but deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore the warning. He tried to hide the fear that was starting to spread through his chest, but Sofia noticed, as she always did. "Pedro, you're acting strange. What's going on?" she asked, her face filled with genuine concern. Pedro forced a smile, trying to mask the panic starting to take hold of him. "Nothing, Sofia. It must have been a mistake. Don't worry." But Sofia wasn't naive. She knew something was wrong, but she respected his silence, even though worry was building up in her heart. In the following days, the tensions increased. First, the cafe they had built with so much effort was destroyed in a mysterious fire. There were no clear signs of how the fire started, but the intensity of the flames and the speed with which they consumed the place made them believe it wasn't an accident. Sophia, with tears in her eyes, watched the apocalyptic scene as the fire devoured what represented her new beginning, her dream. She couldn't believe it. How was this happening? Pedro, with the same pain in his eyes, tried to console her, but knew the fire was no accident. It was a warning. They had been struck once again, and now they could no longer ignore the truth. Someone was trying to destroy everything they had. The following days were marked by a series of inexplicable events. More anonymous threats, more clues that led nowhere, more unsigned messages, but the worst was yet to come. Pedro knew things were about to get worse, and the truth was devastating. Pedro's father was involved. He had known that Pedro's relationship with Sophia was affecting his business, his image, and he couldn't allow this to become a scandal. What Pedro didn't know was that his father was willing to do anything, even destroy his own son's happiness, to protect his reputation. Filled with anger and pain, Pedro decided to confront his father. He could no longer live with this weight, with this doubt about the loyalty of his own family. The meeting took place in his father's office, where it all began. "Why did you do this? How could you betray me like this?" Pedro asked, his voice shaking with rage. His father, sitting behind the large oak desk, looked at him with a cold, indifferent expression. "I did it to protect our family, Pedro. You don't understand. That relationship with Sophia was a threat to our reputation and our business. The fire at the cafe? I arranged it. I couldn't let you be led by something so useless." Pedro, completely devastated by the revelation, felt a deep pain in his chest. His father, the man who had always taught him to be strong, was now showing himself to be a monster without remorse. "You destroyed our life for the sake of your image?" Pedro shouted, feeling the weight of every word. However, Pedro's father remained unmoved. "You'll never understand. I did this for you, for the good of our family." While Pedro faced the shock of his father's betrayal, Sophia was fighting her own battle. Her father, now trying to show repentance, swore he would do anything to win back his daughter's trust. But Sophia knew his words weren't trustworthy. She knew him too well. The love he claimed to have for her was tainted with manipulation and control, and she needed to sever that bond, even if it meant distancing herself even more from her own history. When Pedro and Sophia finally met at the hotel where they first met, the pain was still very present. But at that moment, one thing was clear. Together, they would face whatever came their way. They had learned, in the hardest way, that true love does not surrender to fear. They would face the consequences, whatever the cost. But as they looked into each other's eyes, they knew that no matter what they shared was greater than any obstacle. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Now, the question remains, what does the future hold for Pedro and Sophia? Is this story getting exciting? Leave a comment, letting me know what you think. Don't worry, the story continues. Pedro and Sophia were stunned by the revelations. The shock of the truths uncovered had left both of them in a state of despair. The trust that once united them now seemed like a distant echo, and the path that once appeared so clear had now become a tangled mess of doubts and uncertainties. They had sworn to face the consequences together, but the reality was much more complex than they had imagined. The pain of the betrayals seeped into every corner of their lives, making it impossible to ignore. With the weight of the revelations about Pedro's father and Sophia's father's manipulation, they knew they could no longer keep running. There was no more room for silence. The small town, which had once represented the hope of a fresh start, now felt like a prison where they were cornered by their family's choices. The cafe, a reflection of the love and trust they had once placed in each other, was now becoming the symbol of the fight they were about to face. It was then that the first major decision was made. Pedro and Sophia knew they needed to return to the big city. Confronting their families was inevitable, but they could no longer wait. They knew that if they didn't take action now, the weight of the past would drag them forever. The anxiety of returning to the city they feared, mixed with a sense of urgency. They needed to face their fears, and, in doing so, regain control of their own lives. Upon arrival, the tension was palpable. The city felt different to Sophia. She felt as though every street, every corner was marked by her father's gaze, always watching, always ready to control her. She didn't know how, but she sensed he was still nearby, observing every step she took. Her heart raced, but she couldn't allow herself to be paralyzed by fear. Pedro, on the other hand, felt the weight of his own family on his shoulders. His father, with his arrogance and power, would not be easy to face. But Pedro knew there was no other choice. They needed to confront the truth head-on, no matter the cost. The first encounter was with Sophia's father, who, as expected, tried to mask his coldness with words of regret. He sat there in his grand living room, wearing the expression he had always used to manipulate those around him. But something in his gaze betrayed the facade. He still wanted to control Sophia, still believed he could force her to do what he desired. "Daughter, I did what I did because I thought I was doing what was best for you. You know, I've always wanted what's best for our family," he said, his voice heavy with false regret. Sophia didn't want to hear those empty words anymore. She knew that behind them was the man who had always seen her as a pawn in his game. "You don't know what's best for me," she replied, her voice firm but full of pain. "I am no longer your puppet. I can't live my life under the control of someone who only thinks of themselves." The pain she felt was deep, but there was also a new strength within her, something that made her feel stronger than ever. While Sophia faced her father, Pedro was facing an even greater challenge, his own father. The man he had always admired, but who now seemed like a stranger. The confrontation was set in his father's imposing office, the place where many of the decisions that had shaped his life were made. The room, with its luxurious furniture and scent of power, seemed unchanged, but to Pedro, everything in it felt suffocating. "I knew this was going to happen. You'll never understand, Pedro," his father said, looking at him distantly. His voice, cold and calculating, made Pedro feel as though he were being swallowed by the icy grip of the man who had once seemed like his greatest role model. "You betrayed our family for a woman who has nothing to do with what we've built." His father's words cut like a sharp knife. "I did what I did to protect everything you should have been protecting. You're weak, Pedro." Pedro felt the anger rise within him, but he also knew this wasn't the time to lose control. "You don't understand me, Dad. You never have. I am not you. I won't bow to fear and manipulation. I'm not weak for loving someone. I'm strong for choosing to live my life the way I believe." Those words were like a shout that echoed deep within his soul. He didn't know how, but in that moment, he felt freer than he had ever felt before. Meanwhile, Sophia began to realize the true nature of her father. The man who had always been her reference was more concerned with image and control than with her well-being. The pain of having been manipulated for so long was immense, but at the same time, there was a sense of relief, as if a great barrier had been broken. She no longer had to carry the guilt of not meeting his expectations. She no longer had to sacrifice herself for something that would never be hers. However, the consequences of Pedro and Sophia's decision were more complex than they had imagined. Pedro's father, in his attempt to destroy what he believed to be a threat, was now preparing for a more insidious attack. He knew that Pedro and Sophia wouldn't give up easily, and he was willing to do whatever it took to crush what he considered an affront to his authority. The dirty games were just beginning. The pressure grew with each passing day. While Pedro and Sophia remained resolute in their decision to be together, they knew the fight was far from over. Pedro's father, with his network of powerful contacts, began to apply even more pressure, making covert moves to sabotage the businesses they had worked so hard to build. But at the same time, they were more determined than ever. Now, it wasn't just about their love, it was about fighting for their own freedom. They would no longer be victims of manipulation and lies. Together, Pedro and Sophia began to realize that the only way to win was to confront their families head-on, without fear, without hesitation. They could no longer live in the shadows of the past. The war was just beginning, and they were ready to fight until the end. The future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear. The love they shared was stronger than any obstacle that could be placed before them. They knew that, even if the world around them crumbled, as long as they were together, nothing could tear them apart. The power struggle and manipulation from their families was far from over, But Pedro and Sofia were ready to face whatever was necessary. Now, with the truth revealed and the battle for freedom underway, their fate was in the hands of the future. But what will happen when they are forced to make decisions that will change their lives forever? Pedro and Sofia's battle wasn't just against their families. It was also against the very limits life had imposed on them. Pedro's father, realizing his son wouldn't back down, intensified his efforts. He used his influence to attack Pedro and Sofia's cafe, spreading rumors in the big city. Customers began to disappear, contracts were canceled, and suppliers hesitated to work with them. It was as if a shadow loomed over everything they had built, threatening to consume it all. Despite this, Pedro and Sofia refused to give up. They knew their strength came from the love they shared and their belief in a different future. Even as the challenges piled up, they found solace in one another. Sofia, with her creativity and vision, came up with the idea to transform the cafe into something more than just a business. It would become a refuge for people who, like them, sought to escape lives full of pressure and stifling expectations. But there was a problem. The money was running out. With no other choice, Pedro made a risky decision. He decided to sell the only valuable asset he owned, a small property inherited from his mother. Sofia worried about the emotional toll of this decision, but knew Pedro was determined to fight until the end. The money from the sale would be enough to revamp the cafe and pay urgent debts. However, Pedro's father hadn't given up. Learning about the sale, he deviously purchased the property using an intermediary. When Pedro found out, his anger reached its peak. He wants to destroy everything, Sofia. This isn't about us anymore. It's about the control he's always wanted over my life. I can't let this go on. Sofia held Pedro's hand, looking deep into his eyes. We can't play his game, Pedro. We need to be smarter. It's not with force that we'll win, but with intelligence. That's when they had an idea. Sofia knew Pedro's father's influence was powerful, but she also understood that his power came from the fear he instilled. And like any powerful man, he had secrets. Using old contacts from the city, they began investigating Pedro's father's connections. They discovered something surprising. He was involved in illegal businesses, using his position to cover up fraud that could ruin his reputation. Even so, Pedro hesitated to use this information. Despite everything, it was still his father, and he knew exposing these truths could destroy more than just their family relationship. But Sofia was firm. Pedro, he's destroying our lives without a second thought. This isn't about revenge, it's about protecting ourselves. He's given us every reason to fight with all the weapons we have. With the evidence in hand, Pedro and Sofia decided to act strategically. Instead of making everything public, they arranged a meeting with both their parents. The chosen location was symbolic. The old land where Pedro and Sofia first met, before all the lies and manipulation. There, amidst the ruins of the past, the final confrontation took place. I know what you've done, Pedro began, his voice firm. He placed the documents on an improvised table, showing the evidence of his father's illegal activities. But we're not here to threaten you. We're here to end this once and for all. Sofia added, we want freedom. You have no right to control our lives. And if you don't stop, we'll take this further. Pedro's father remained silent, but it was clear he was shaken. He knew that if this information came to light, he would lose everything: power, influence, and his respectable image. On the other side, Sofia's father tried to argue, but saw in his daughter's determination that she was no longer under his control. It was a tense moment, but Pedro and Sofia's resolve was unshakable. They had reached a point where fear no longer controlled them. Faced with the couple's strength and courage, their parents realized they had lost. Pedro's father agreed to back off, but under one condition. Pedro and Sofia were never to reveal the secrets they had uncovered. For him, it was a bitter defeat, but he knew he had no other choice. With that, a kind of truce was established. Pedro and Sofia left that meeting stronger than ever. They knew they couldn't change the past, but they had gained something neither of them had before: the freedom to choose their own path. Back at the cafe, they began rebuilding the business with a new perspective. They transformed the space into a vibrant environment where people could share stories, support one another, and find refuge. The business thrived, not because they had money or power, but because there was truth in what they were doing. Pedro and Sofia understood that the love they shared wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had faced the worst life could throw at them together, and that made them stronger. Every battle, every loss, every pain had turned into a lesson. They were no longer the same people who had started this journey. They were more than that. And so, as the cafe flourished and their hearts found peace, Pedro and Sofia knew they had won, not because they defeated their parents, but because they chose to fight for themselves. There were no guarantees of a future without struggles, but they were ready to face it together. And do you believe Pedro and Sofia can overcome all of this? Let us know in the comments what you think, and if we should continue this story in part 3. What did you think of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which part you liked the most. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming exciting videos. See you in the next story.